Hi everybody and welcome to Module 10. This is one on species interactions. This is a topic we're going to touch a lot more on later in the class, but this class is a nice sort of easy introduction to some of the ways in which species interact with each other. So I hope you enjoy it. Right, I'll just start sharing the screen. There it is. Okay, so let me just get my pointer up. So by the end of this class, you guys should be able to define the main forms of species interactions and illustrate the trophic cascade through a case study of grey wolves in Yellowstone. The story of wolves in Yellowstone is something that is well worth familiarizing yourself with. It is a pretty staggering story as much as anything else. It's also something that's very local. Yellowstone's only about 4 to 5 hours away from here. And anyone that hasn't visited it, I would heartily recommend. It's a fantastic place. Okay. So, first thing we're going to talk about is what are the ways in which two species interact. So in this class, we're going to introduce you to the basic ways in which two species interact with each other. The first one we're going to talk about is predation. Predation also includes herbivory and parasitism. When we talk about predation, it's shorthand in the ecological literature for one species consuming another. So, for example, a shark eating a seal is a shark eating a seal. A caterpillar eating a leaf is it's herbivorous interaction, but this caterpillar in this case is acting as a predator because it's consuming the trophic level beneath it, this leaf. Also, we talk about parasitism. So these are salmon, and these little dots that are on them are sea lice. So these are parasites that are living on these young salmon. And in all these cases, we're going to talk about the interaction, and also there'll be this positive negative, or positive positive, or negative negative. What this means is this is the effect of the interaction on species 1. This is the effect of the interaction on species 2. So in terms of predation, we've got, okay, one species benefits, one species is losing. We'll also talk about competition, in which both species end up losing. Mutualism, which both species end up benefiting. And also commensalism, in which one species benefits, but the other species is not affected. This is somewhat controversial. This even exists at all in nature. And we'll talk about it later on. Okay, so those are the basic forms. Let's go through them in a bit more detail. So first of all, predation. And in predation, we're talking about one individual or one species consuming another. So when this happens, predators, or the consumer, consumes the prey, which is the one being eaten. The predators therefore acquire energy and nutrients. The predators therefore benefit. When you have a predator, for example, the shark eating the seal, the shark is gaining energy and nutrients from the body of the seal. It therefore is benefiting. The prey are often killed outright. For example, this seal is in just a world of trouble and they're killed outright. And if they're not killed outright, they do become weakened, so the prey lose. So for example, in this herbivorous interaction just here, the beetles are acting as the predator, they're eating the leaf, and so they're acquiring energy and nutrients, which is a benefit. And although the plant isn't being killed necessarily by the consumption of this leaf, it is being weakened. It's losing leaf tissue, it's losing the ability to photosynthesize, so it's being weakened by this interaction. Now, predation does also include parasites. This is where we delve into some really good nightmare fuel just here. So it's estimated that up to half of the animal species on this planet are parasites. Parasites can be internal or external. So for example, here we've got, these are head lice. This is a medicinal leech. Both of these are external. They live on the outside. We also get tapeworms. These are internal parasites. They live inside the body of their host. And also we have things like mosquitoes, which are external. The good news about parasites is, well, you have lots already. You might not want to think about it, but even if you don't think you do, you've got a few little passengers hitching a ride. You might have noticed that all of the parasites I've shown here are parasites of people. But parasites are a form of predator. For example, when this medicinal leech is on your body, it's sucking blood up. It is benefiting from acquiring nutrients and energy. You are losing blood, so that's going to be a negative to begin with. And also you might get infected and stuff like that. It's not good to be bitten by a leech necessarily. Same with tapeworms. They acquire nutrients off their host, but they're taking nutrients away from their host. The Romans actually used to purposefully ingest tapeworms because the nutrients they take off the host means that the host loses weight, so it kept you skinny. Don't recommend. Also, tapeworms, yeah, every now and again when you get rid of them, this is the sight that's presented to you in the bathroom. Not nice. Have fun sleeping. There's also another type of sort of a subgroup of the parasites called the parasitoids. Now, the parasitoids are predominantly insects, and they work slightly differently because rather than the adult attaching to the host and eating it, instead with parasitoids, they lay their eggs inside a host. Many of them are wasps, so this is a parasitoid wasp just here. So the parasitoid, the adult female, lays its eggs inside the host. When the larvae hatch, the emerging larvae then eat their way out of the host, often while the host is still alive. So this is what it ends up looking like here. We have the adult female comes and lays her eggs on the body of this caterpillar. The eggs, or inside the caterpillar, the eggs develop inside the body of the caterpillar. When they hatch, the larvae then start to grow and they eat their way out. So these little larvae here are the larvae of the wasp, and they're munching their way and basically killing this, eating this caterpillar while it's still alive. And you might recognize this as it is literally the plot from the Alien movies. So the writers and producers of the Alien series of movies, most recently it was Alien Covenant, were directly inspired by the actions of parasitoids. This idea of a parasite laying its egg inside a host and then the larva bursting its way out from inside. Yeah, so it does actually exist. So yeah, fun. However, not all predators on this planet are animals. We might automatically gravitate towards thinking predators are these big, scary sharks and things like that, but not all of them are even animals. So there are predatory plants that eat insects. So this is a Venus flytrap. This one's caught a wasp. The Venus flytrap is acting like a predator. It captures these insects, it digests their bodies within its leaves, it acquires nutrients and energy from the insects, and obviously the insect is being negatively affected. Also, these are pitcher plants. So these are very common in Asia and also in parts of America. They have this opening here, and inside this, it smells lovely and sweet as if it's full of nectar, so insects fly in. It's actually full of digestive chemicals, and they digest the body of the insects that go in. Both of these plants tend to exist in areas where the soils are very low nutrient value, and so subsidizing their nutrients with insects allows them to survive. In addition, mistletoe that you think of for Christmas for kissing underneath is actually a parasitic plant. So mistletoe doesn't grow on the soil. Mistletoe instead attaches itself to the branches of trees, and it acquires nutrients by slowly digesting the bodies of these trees. So the mistletoe is obtaining a benefit because it's getting nutrients. The tree is obviously losing because it's being eaten while it's still alive. So not only are all these acting predatory, but some are true predators, some are parasites. One of my favorite non-animal predators is this thing. This is a Pisonia tree. One of the places we conduct research and even lead a field trip was a place called Heron Island on the Great Barrier Reef down in Australia. And this part of the Great Barrier Reef is home to the world's only bird-eating tree. So this is the Pisonia tree. It's the most dominant tree on a lot of these islands. And it is a nesting site for these things. These are sooty terns. So it might look like the terns are having a great time. They come and lay on these Pisonia trees. And the Pisonia tree is planting them a house and everything is good and happy. The issue is these islands are very low in nutrients, and the soil is very low in nutrients. And the way the tree gets nutrients, it can get it through two routes. One, the birds eat fish in the ocean. They come and sit in the tree. They then do a poop. That poop goes into the soil, and that tree then takes up those nutrients in the form of bird poop. However, the birds are seasonal. They're not there all year round. And so the trees for a long time are quite happy to have the birds coming and sitting here. But at the end of the season, just before the birds leave, the trees start producing these incredibly sticky seeds. And these sticky seeds attach themselves to the birds. Some of the birds, when they fly away, transport these seeds to other islands. But the sticky seeds also have a more sinister purpose, because the birds end up completely covered in these sticky seeds, and to the extent where you will find the birds glued to the floor or sometimes glued to the tree itself. The birds then unfortunately die because they're unable to feed and obtain water. And as they die, the nutrients contained within their bodies are absorbed by the tree. So this tree, in effect, is killing birds with the intention of absorbing their nutrients. But because the tree turns on this response just before the birds leave, it shows this is not an accident. The tree is not actively making a decision, but it's turning on the ability to kill birds just before they leave to get that one last pulse of nutrients. So it's the world's only predatory tree. It's kind of cool. So we'll just do a clicker question. So which of these does not describe a predatory interaction? A, wolves and grizzly bears interacting in Yellowstone. B, a fish that eats snails. C, the effect of your domestic cat on wild birds. D, spiders making webs to catch flying insects. Or E, monkey eating leaves from a tree. I'll just give you 5 seconds on this one. Well, the correct answer is A, wolves and grizzly bears interacting in Yellowstone. Although wolves and grizzly bears might fight with each other in Yellowstone, they rarely actively eat each other. Often they're just trying to compete. So as a result, this is not a predatory interaction. Just an aside, I absolutely love this photo. This photo was taken by a camera trap, and it is purely accidental. It is the best smiling monkey selfie you will ever see. So now I'll talk about a second type of interaction. Now I'm going to talk about competition. And this is individuals after the same resources. And this is considered a double negative, although it's not immediately intuitive why. We'll talk about why in a sec. So we can have two basic types. We have interspecific competition. This is where individuals of two different species compete with each other. So for example, lions and hyenas both compete over meat. They're two different species competing over the same resource. So it's interspecific competition. If you have two individuals of the same species competing over a resource, that's intra-specific competition, okay? And the thing with competition is that competition negatively affects everyone involved. So for example, with these lions and hyena, although one species might be able to fight the other off a kill, in the process of that, both species are losing energy, they're potentially risking injury, which means they're both negatively affected. Even if one species comes out on top, it does not do as well as it would do if the other species weren't there. So even if hyena are able to chase lion off a kill and get some of the food, they don't gain as much as if the lions weren't there at all and they were able to have free reign of the environment and just hunt for themselves. Okay. And when it comes to intra-specific competition, even if you're the winner of this tussle, you may be injured by it, which negatively affects you, and it takes energy to compete. Okay. So as a result, although you might think, okay, well, competition surely has a winner because one individual outcompetes the other. It's like, yes, that species does win, but it is still more negatively affected than if it had never had to go through competition in the first place. So competition negatively affects everybody involved. Now, it's not, again, just always animals. This also happens in the plant world an awful lot. So one of the big examples of this is tropical rainforests. So tropical rainforests, when you first go, look like an absolute plant paradise. They're so green and they're so lush and there's just plants everywhere. So when you first get there, it's like, man, this must be absolute paradise for plants. But actually, every single one of those plants is involved in fierce competition for light. So although the plants might be growing on everything rather, there's so much competition for light in tropical rainforests that all plants are locked in a continual struggle. Because this competition for light, plants often have to divert resources away from reproduction to invest in growing tall. So for example, the big trees, it might be worth the best, if that tree was living on its own in a beautiful, ideal habitat, it might obtain the best fitness or produce the most offspring by growing to 20 feet tall and then just start producing seeds and make loads of offspring. However, in an area of high competition, it has to invest in growing taller, so it grows taller than the other plants or other trees around it. And so what it's doing by growing taller, it's taking resources that it could use to make seeds and instead investing them in growing taller, because it has to do that or else it gets shaded out when all the trees around it grow taller and it doesn't get any light. So as a result, all these plants are locked in this fierce competition for light, and as a result, they get negatively impacted through shading. The third type of interaction is something called mutualism. And mutualism is a situation where everybody benefits. All species involved in the mutualism get a benefit. One of the most common and obvious of these is pollinators. So in a pollinator, so for example, this honeybee on this flower, the animal, the bee, is obtaining food in the form of nectar and a bit of pollen from the plant. And the plant is obtaining a benefit because the plant is able to sexually reproduce efficiently. So if we compare these pollinators where the bee is now taking some pollen and it will drop it off at another flower, that's called insect pollination. If you compare that against wind pollination, where the plant just puts a load of pollen into the wind and it blows around, the vast majority of that pollen is just blown willy-nilly and lost. In a pollination arrangement, the vast majority of the pollen that comes off this flower is delivered to another flower by that bee. So the amount of pollen being produced compared to the amount that's being delivered is much higher. Now, when it comes to pollination, plants want their pollinators to only visit one species, their own. There's no use producing a load of pollen and offering some nectar as a reward if that pollinator then just goes and lands on a completely different species of flower, because the pollen that you deposited will be lost. It's of no use. So you want that pollinator to only go to other members of your species. Now, this desire has led to some spectacular examples of what we call co-evolution. So co-evolution is two species or three or more evolving so they fit each other and match each other really, really well. One of the examples is this hummingbird. This is a hummingbird from South America. This is the flower it predominantly feeds off, and this is the shape of its beak. Now, what's happened is the bird has evolved a very curved beak so that it can easily obtain nectar from the bottom of this very curved flower. And the flower has continued to curve, so it drives the evolution of the curved beak. As a result, this hummingbird now struggles to obtain nectar from other flowers, so just visits this species. And also this flower benefits because now this hummingbird only visits members of its own species, so it increases the chance pollination goes to the right place. One of the most sort of groups in which this has been most dramatic is the orchids. So orchids are predominantly pollinated by bees, and orchids have developed these incredible diversity of flowers that are very, very specialized on one particular species of bee. So as a result, they've become this very, very tight mutualism. One of the other mutualisms that's very, very important globally is the relationship between coral and the algae called zooanthellae that live within them. So coral, This is a coral polyp here. Coral is an animal. It's related to a jellyfish. And within its tissues, there are specialized algae. These specialized algae called zooanthellae that live in the cells. Now, these specialized algae photosynthesize, like other plants do, and provide energy to the coral. The coral provides shelter to the zooanthellae, and also, just as an aside, it's these zooanthellae that give coral their colour. So the pinks and the yellows and the purples that you see in coral are all due to the different zooanthellae. However, if coral are stressed, they actually expel their algae. And when they expel their algae die, and the coral lose an important nutrition source. This can lead to coral death. And this process is affectionately known as coral bleaching. So you might have heard that term a few times. This is a healthy coral, lovely and colourful. This is a bleached coral. It's actually the same coral. And this is a bleached coral where it's expelled the algae that give it the colour. And this coral at the minute is still technically alive, but it's no longer obtaining the nutrients from its algae, so it will lead to coral death. Now, there are lots of examples of mutualism when everybody benefits, and some of them are really quite interesting. So, one of my favourites that you see in the Indo-Pacific Ocean is a boxer crab. Boxer crab are these little species of crab. They unfortunately don't have big claws, so what they do instead is they pick up two little anemones, and they have them on, and these look a bit like boxing gloves, which is why it's called a boxer crab. Now, the crab obtains benefit because it can use these anemones to ward off adversaries. An anemone's sting can hurt, so if any fish come and investigate, it can just hit them with its stinging anemones. And the anemone attains a benefit because the crab, as it's using this boxing action to attack its enemies, it often kills them, and then the enemies get to eat them. In addition, you'll often see this cleaning behaviour occur again and again and again in nature. So in this case, this is a Nile crocodile. There's a species of plover that picks parasites and bits of meat and just nastiness out of the teeth of these crocodiles. The crocodiles actually open their mouths to let these plover come in. The plover obtains a benefit because it's getting food. The crocodile obtains a benefit because this is basically like cleaning your teeth. It's like going to the dentist. It means that crocodiles are eating predominantly meat. It means they're not having bits of meat stuck to their teeth. You see the same thing in tropical reefs, where you'll have these things like cleaner wrasse going inside the mouths of these large predatory fish, in this case a grouper, and removing parasites and bits of food. So this is seen again and again and again. Okay. Now, let's talk about commensalism. So commensalism is a slightly interesting one. In commensalism, one party benefits, it gets a plus. The other is unaffected, so it's not affected by the presence. This is a bit controversial because in most cases, the unaffected, the zero, might really be negative. It's just not immediately obvious. One of the big examples of this are bromeliads. So this is a bromeliad. This is one in the wild, in nature. You can buy these in Smiths. They're very beautiful ornamental plants. The great thing about bromeliads is they don't need to grow in soil. They can grow on anything. And in many cases, they're what we call epiphytic. So this is a plant, this is a bromeliad here, and it's growing on this tree. Now they grow on the tree, its roots form this sort of holdfast, they can attach to the tree. They grow on the tree, but they do not extract nutrients from the tree. They're not parasitic like the mistletoe was. The mistletoe was growing on the tree, but also taking nutrients off the tree. It was a parasite. Bromeliads don't do that. They just rest, they just sit on it. However, bromeliads, their leaves can hold large water volumes, and the weight of the water inside this bromeliad can actually cause the tree branch to snap. So that would be a negative impact on the tree. So although at first it looks like the tree isn't really losing out because it's just got this plant sitting on it, it could be quite negative when it snaps the branch. Another example is remora fish. So this is a remora. Remora are famous because they hitch a ride on large ocean species. You'll often see them attached to sharks or rays or in some cases whales. So they get on these other species and they hitch a ride and they go along. At first it was just like, oh yeah, they're just sticking on and hitching a ride. But sharks are the most streamlined animals on the planet. They're incredibly efficient swimmers. So having this extra lump attached to you might increase the drag that the shark feels. That means it has to use more energy to swim, so that is a negative impact. Righty, so let's have another fake clicker question. So when monkeys eat fruit from trees, what sort of interaction is this? Think about who benefits and loses. So are monkeys eating fruit predation, mutualism, competition, commensalism, or none of the above? Just give you 10 seconds on this. Okay, well, in this case, it's actually a mutualism. Because although the monkey is eating part of the tree and it's obtaining some nutrients and energy from that, it's also eating the fruit. And what is the purpose of fruit? Fruit are designed to spread seeds. The tree produces fruit on purpose, so the monkeys will eat it. And when the monkeys eat the fruit, they eat the seeds with it. And then the monkeys are moving around the forest. They then poop those seeds out and deposit them somewhere else. So the tree is using the monkey as a seed disperser to spread, and so it can disperse to new areas. In addition, when that seed is pooped out, it is in poop. And poop is a amazing fertilizer. So that little seed is getting pooped out in a packet of fertilizer, and so it's increasing the chance it will germinate and do well. So although a monkey eating leaves would be predation because the tree is losing, when it's eating fruit, it's a mutualism because it's dispersing seeds and providing a service to the tree. Okay, now these interactions between species are important for food webs, because if interactions are left unchecked, if unchecked, species in lower trophic levels can overexploit the plants they eat, especially with herbivores. So what happens is predators remove herbivores, that allows plants to survive, and this is known as a trophic cascade. And one of the big examples of this is actually in sea otters. That was the classic one. So this is a sea urchin, and sea urchins eat kelp. They eat a lot of kelp. They eat the very base of the kelp frond, and so as a result, the whole plant will float away. And if you get sea urchins able to survive unchecked with no predation, they destroy enormous amounts of kelp, because the predation threat of felt by kelp from sea urchins is very large. So as a result, you lose entire kelp forests. However, if sea otters are present, the sea otters have a very strong consumptive force on the sea urchin. Because the sea urchin populations are reduced by the sea otter, the threat coming down from the sea urchins to the kelp is much reduced. See, this arrow goes much smaller. And this process of predators eating prey and then indirectly benefiting plants is known as a trophic cascade. It's cascading down through the trophic levels. Okay. And now I'm going to transition over to wolves, and especially in Yellowstone. So before we start, let's think about, and you can just email me the answer to this. What is your personal attitude towards wolves? A, I would like to see them reintroduced and have hunting banned across their range. I am happy to coexist with wolves. B, I would like to see their populations increase, but they can't be allowed to exist near towns. C, they should remain in national parks but killed outside those parks. D, they pose a serious threat to animals and people, should not roam free and instead be contained in fenced areas. E, they are so dangerous they should be exterminated from the country. Just think about which one of those best describes your attitude towards wolves, and then just let me know on email. Okay, so let's have an example about the story of the wolf. So if you think about the wolf, and especially in the western US, so this map here shows the distribution of wolves in the counterminous United States. So prior to European settlement, wolves were widely distributed over most of the US. So this sort of dark yellow, if that's even a word, orangey colour, is the historic range of where wolves used to exist before Europeans came to America. So there were still Native Americans living in America. They coexisted with wolves for millennia. But this is the distribution of wolves prior to Europeans arriving in North America. The red is the current range of wolves. So we've got a little population up in the Great Lakes, the Arizona, New Mexico, Mexican wolf population, and this is the Yellowstone population. And it's now expanded out of Yellowstone, so as a result it's covering parts of Wyoming, Idaho, Oregon, Montana, and Washington. By way of an interest, a wolf did appear in Utah a couple of years ago. It made it down, and part of the dispersal, it got down into Utah, and someone shot it. So that was the end of that. But this is where they used to exist. This is where they now exist. So their range is much smaller than it used to be. And to be honest, humans and wolves have competed with each other for millennia. Since the very sort of dawn of people being able to write, they've talked about how wolves are terrifying and things like that. We as people exist in a very similar trophic position to wolves. We like to eat the same food, and we do compete with each other. As a result, and because of fear of wolves, in the US, we nearly drove wolves to extinction by 1960. They were almost completely eradicated from the US by 1960. However, in 1970, wolves were listed under the Endangered Species Act, which meant you weren't allowed to hunt them anymore. And then the big step that was taken was, in 1995-96, wolves were actually reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park. Prior to the reintroduction of wolves, the only populations in the lower 48 states were the Great Lakes population and the Mexican wolf population. This population did not exist at all. There was no northwest population. In 1995, a few wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone. So after that introduction, by 2011, they'd grown such that populations in Idaho, Montana, eastern Oregon and Washington had not only established, but they'd become so abundant that they were delisted under the Endangered Species Act. 2011, the first wolf made it to California in many decades. 2012, populations in Wyoming were delisted. 2013, the US Fish and Wildlife Service proposed delisting the grey wolf for the remainder of the US, and they've kind of bounced backwards and forwards ever since. So there's been this, should they be listed under the Endangered Species Act? Should we allow active hunting? What should we do with wolves? Well, let's have a look. So do wolves affect elk, their natural prey? So wolves absolutely love to eat elk. They love them. Elk are not easy to catch, but the amount of meat on an elk is enormous, so it can feed an entire pack of wolves for a long time. So wolves always go after elk. So what happens to elk population size when wolves are removed or added? So we now have this wonderful natural experiment. We had no wolves in Yellowstone for a very long time, since about the sort of beginning of the 20th century, so 1910 is when they were eradicated from Yellowstone. We then had no wolves for about 90 years in Yellowstone, but then we reintroduced them in the 90s, which we can then see what actually happens to elk populations and other species when you add wolves. So this is the, on the y-axis, remember we're looking at graphs here, so what do we do first? We look at what type of graph it is. Well, we've got dots and a line, so it's a scatter plot and a line graph. What are the axes? On the x-axis we have time. On the y-axis we have the northern elk, percentage of northern elk inside Yellowstone National Park as a percentage of their maximum. So this is the most amount we've ever seen. The whole time we're looking at the percentage of this maximum. So if we go through time, at this point there were no wolves and the elk populations inside Yellowstone National Park ticked along quite high. Wolves then reintroduced at this line, and we can see, yeah, the elk population starts to decline. So wolves do seem to reduce elk populations. We can actually have a look at then how that affects the hunt. So here is, again, time, and here's number of elk killed. The green is the Gardner late hunt harvest, so that's killed by people. The blue is elk killed by wolves in Yellowstone National Park. So yeah, you can see the hunt harvest fluctuated around, and then it seems to have declined, and wolves have gone up. Wolf kills have gone up. So wolves do seem to kill elk. Well, the question we have to ask is this a bad thing? So, reintroducing wolves to Yellowstone has allowed lots of vegetation in the park to recover. Because prior to the wolf reintroduction, elk populations were likely greater than Yellowstone National Park could actually support. And elk had destroyed much of the vegetation in Yellowstone. So wolf reintroduction increased willow, aspen and cottonwood, which are all pretty critical, both for bank stabilisation in rivers and also because we just need healthy plant populations. So let's have a look at this. On these graphs, on the x-axis we have year, and the y-axis we have populations of different species. So if we look at wolves first, nothing, 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 nothing. There's the reintroduction, and yes, the wolf population in Yellowstone grows a lot. Okay, so let's have a look at the number of cottonwood trees greater than 5 centimetre diameter at breast height. This is just a way that you measure the size of trees. So cottonwoods, we had nothing, 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 nothing. Suddenly they go up. Let's have a look at the elk. We've got, yep, they're declining after the wolves have been reintroduced. Look at the willow, they almost shoot straight up. And look at the browsing, this is the amount of percent browse, so which trees have actually been browsed by elk, and it's dropped down. We then start to see, well, beaver are going really high as well. So why is this happening? Well, the reason the beaver are going up is twofold. One, they now have cottonwoods, willows and aspen that they can use to make their dams, and also the rivers are starting to stabilise. In addition to the beaver going up, we've also got bison going up. So the introduction of wolves has initiated a trophic cascade where elk have been, populations have been reduced. The reduction in elk has allowed cottonwood to increase, willow to increase, and aspen to increase. The fact that we now have these willow, aspen and cottonwood has allowed beaver to re-establish, and also the lack of competition for other browsing is allowing bison to go up. So we have this situation where introducing just one species generates this trophic cascade that affects whole ecological communities. Okay, so now by the end of this class you should be able to define the main forms of species interactions, and 2, illustrate a trophic cascade through a case study of grey wolves in Yellowstone. Okay, so thank you, hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. All the best.